Hello, welcome back. George Hepworth, Grover Park Consulting. In today's session, we're going to use a PowerApps application to store records in a junction table that supports many records on one side to many records on the other. Those of you who are Access developers will immediately know what I'm talking about when I talk about many-to-many relationships between tables and a junction table. For those of you coming from the PowerApps world, this may be a new concept, although I think once you see what I'm doing, you'll feel more comfortable with it. We're also going to use a conditional in our patch command to decide how to handle those new records. Before we jump into the PowerApps application, I thought it would be a good idea to look at the relationship between the two tables we're going to work with and the junction table. In our application, we have a table of creators or authors. We also have a table of publications, so many authors and many books. However, it's not simply a one author to one book relationship. One author can work on many books. They can write a number of different volumes over the years. Each book can in turn have one or more co-authors, all of whom contributed to that single publication. We have many authors and many books. The way we handle that in a properly designed relational database application is through what we call a junction table. A junction table stores two foreign key fields. One is the ID field, or the primary key field from this table, in this case the creator table, and the foreign key, which represents the primary key in the other table, in this case the publications table. So each record in the publication creator table consists of the ID of the author and the ID of the book. Each author can be in this publication creator table multiple times, depending on how many books they have written, and each publication can be in this publication creator table multiple times, depending on how many co-authors contribute to that book. Let's see how that works in our PowerApps application. Once again, we're looking at our development environment for PowerApps in my 365 account, and I've opened three lists, the three lists that we're interested in: the creator list, the publication list, and the publication creator junction table. I showed you the relationship window, which identifies the way the publication creator table works. It's the junction table that contains two ID fields, the publication ID and the creator ID. One of the key differences Access developers are going to find at working with SharePoint lists in PowerApps, it's quite different from what we're used to in the Access world, is the fact that these are in fact records rather than mere numbers. And in the Access world, we know that these are what are called lookup fields, and we know how that works. So I won't go into that too deeply here, but just wanted to reiterate the fact that this is in fact a link to that record, not simply a number on the list. And we have the publication ID. As we noted before, there are 4 instances of this publication, each paired with a single creator. What that tells us is this publication has 4 co-authors. If we sort this a little differently, this creator has produced 2 works, 2 publications. Actually, it's a book and a DVD, but this creator has produced 2 publications that I have already entered into my library collection, and you can see the 2 different publication IDs. So we have many to many, as we talked about. Let's look at how PowerApps is going to handle that. Here we are in my 365 development environment looking at the application we've been using for our studies here. Mike's Mobile Library, the development version. I'm going to launch the app by playing it and walk you through quickly how the publications to creator screen works in a couple of different ways. First, let's navigate directly to the publication creator screen. Talk you through what you see here, orient you to the different elements and how they function. We have 3 galleries: a publication gallery, an author gallery, and a publication and authors gallery. This gallery uses as its items the records from the publications table. This one uses records from the creator table. This one uses the records from our junction table, publication authors. Right now we have nothing selected, so this one shows no records. There's no items selected because there's nothing selected in either of these two we want to see matched up. Notice that I have added these labels, which indicate that even though by default when the screen opens, the first element in each of these lists is highlighted, indicating that it is the selected, and I'm doing the air quotes, selected item. It isn't actually selected in terms of how the application is going to process it. In order to actually select it, I have to do something, and that, in this case, click on the gallery to select it. What that does is it selects the publication, code that runs on the onSelect, then identifies any currently linked authors for that publication. And when we have both of those identified, then we can populate our third gallery with the one record that matches that selection. Notice, though, we still have the label indicating this one does not have an active selection. This is a default, and in order to make it actually work, I'm going to click that record. Now it is selected in both places and selected here. If I try to add an additional linkage on these two that are selected, I'm going to get an error message. 1984 is already linked to George Orwell. I can't add a second time because there's only one relationship, obviously. I can, however, select a different author and link that different author. And this again reflects the fact that we have a many-to-many. Many authors can contribute to a single publication. However, this was an inaccurate or inappropriate linkage, so we're going to delete that one and return it to only the single author. Let's go back and select a volume or a book that I know has multiple authors. And again, once I select an author in a publication in the publications gallery, it identifies the authors that are associated with it and displays them in our junction table, the gallery bound to our junction table. So there are 4 authors, each of them shown here with the publication. This is different from the nested gallery we used in the publication screen, where we're only showing the publication once. That's a nested structure. This one is just a straight gallery bound to the junction table for publication creators, and it shows all 4 records. It defaults to the first record, even though there are 4, and this is simply a reflection that I can't select multiple items in this gallery, so it's going to default to the first. And that's how that works. So that's basically how it works if we come in straight from the menu and begin to look at the relationships between publications and authors. Let's go through a different route. We'll go through publications. This time we'll select a different book. Let's pick, I think I have a author selected for Boone's Lick. We'll edit it. And our nested gallery updates to show that Boone's Lick was written by Larry McMurtry. Now I can come through this path to the same link author creator screen, and it will eventually update to show Boone's Lick, Larry McMurtry. And since we have not yet selected an author in the gallery by clicking on it, it doesn't display. So if I click here to display it, this is an artifact of the way these galleries work. I've been trying to implement a workaround that will actually do this all automatically. So far, I've only achieved partial success, as you can see. More work to be done, obviously. But again, I can't add it a second time. I can't add this selected author a second time. I'm going to go back one more time and illustrate another function that is implemented in this gallery. If I come in the first time, fresh from the menu, I have not selected a publication, not selected an author. These are the defaults, although they have not been selected. My linkage icon is disabled because I have to actively select a publication. And now, even though this updates to show the author, it still indicates that it has not been actively selected in this gallery, and my linkage icon remains disabled. Once I have actively selected the author in the author gallery, now the linkage is activated. So that's how it works in the interface. Let's go back and look at the code behind some of these. In order to look at the code, we're going to close or stop playing the application, and we're going to look at the elements of this screen. Let's start with the two little labels which indicate whether we have an active selection or not. Now, as you just saw, these work almost all the time. I still have some variations to work out where it doesn't always work the way I want. But if I made it perfect, I would never have anything to show you. So let's start with the default book. That's this one here. It is visible. We set the visible property to be true if the value of this variable is 0. In other words, if there is no publication selected. Publication ID is 0, which can't be because it's going to reflect the primary key. Boone's Lick has been selected, so var publication does not equal 0. Therefore, this label is hidden. The same is true of the default author, except that I have discovered through extensive testing that this can be one of two different manifestations. The var creator, which is the author variable, can either be 0, which means it is a record, or it can be blank, which means that it is a record. Now, after extensive testing, as I say, I discovered that I had to say it's either 0 or is blank, depending on how I get here. I'm still trying to trace through all these paths and understand the different ways that PowerApps identifies the data type of variables. But to a large extent, it is still, even after several months, something of a black box to me. And I have learned, rather than try to open that black box and see what's in there, just figure out, okay, here's a case where I have to say it's either going to be a number or excuse me, or represent a record, and it's going to be a non-zero or non-blank value. In this case, it's selected as Larry McMurtry. My life will go on without having to know that. These two are set up so that the align property is also either going to be right or center, depending on the value of that variable. So when the default label is hidden, this moves to the center. When it's visible, this moves to the right so we can see it, and the same is true here. The enabled disabled property of this linkage icon is controlled. Oh, I want to go there yet. I want to go to display mode. If, again, if any one of our three values, or except our three conditions are met, there are 2 values, 3 conditions. If any of those 3 are met, we're going to disable it. Otherwise, we're going to allow it to be editable. If the creator ID is 0, or if it's a blank record, 0, or if publication is 0, disable it. Don't allow it to be used unless we have valid selections in both an author and a publication. And that's how we make that work. So the final thing we need to do is understand how we actually complete the step of linking those records from the 2 galleries into the junction table. And here is where the conditional is needed to decide whether or not we can do it. Here's the patch command, and I'll come back in a moment and explain the patch command. But before we allow the user to try to add a new record, we want to make sure that it's not going to be a duplicate. And the way we do that is to count rows. If we apply a filter to the publication creator table, we say we want to see all records in the publication creator table where the creator ID is equal to our variable var creator ID, and var creator ID is set when we select an item in the gallery, and where the publication ID is equal to the publication variable set in this gallery. We filter it down. If that returns 0 rows, if the count of rows on that filtered set of records is 0, meaning that it doesn't already exist, we go ahead and patch it. We add a new record using the defaults, as we've seen in previous videos. That's the syntax which tells patch we're going to add a new record. If the count of rows is anything other than 0, we're going to notify that this publication is already linked to this creator. And that's the notification that we saw when we tried to duplicate a record. So you do a little validation. If we pass the validation, we go ahead and add the record. The patch command says go to the publication creator table. Using the defaults, we're going to add a new record. For the new record, the creator ID will be the value of var creator ID, and the value of that new creator ID record is its text value. This is the syntax we have to use, as you will recall from a previous video, to work with lookup fields, which are the complex data fields in SharePoint lists. And the same is true for publication ID. We're going to go to the publication ID field and add the complex data, the ID of the publication, and the value of the publication. When this runs, we add the new record, and that then refreshes our gallery. Before we move on, let's make sure we cover this. I think I skipped over this, so I just want to make sure if this is a repeat, we'll pick it up in the edits. The onSelect action of each of our 2 galleries, our 2 source galleries, the publication and author gallery, sets the variables that we need in the patch command we just saw. And here's how it works. For the publication gallery, we set the var publication ID to the value of the selected item, this item, in the publication gallery. Then we set a second variable. Now, these 2 subsequent steps are not needed to store the publication in the junction table. These two steps, the second and third, are needed to identify for the creator gallery the default that we're going to display. We look into the publication creator table and set a variable which reflects the value of the publication that we just identified in this gallery. In other words, this variable will hold the value of the primary key corresponding to that publication ID value in our junction table. Now this again will be the first. A publication can appear multiple times in the junction table. Lookup will find the first of those values, depending on how it's sorted. With that, we can then look back into the publication creator junction table and find, using lookup, the value of the first creator associated with that publication. And that then allows us to create a default creator for our second gallery. And that's how we are able to populate to select a default in our gallery. Note that providing a default does not set the value or make a selection in the gallery. It simply says this is the default you're going to use. We still have to go ahead and click it or somehow select it to be able to use it. The onSelect value of this gallery repeats what we just looked at, except that we only need to create one additional variable, and that is the creator ID, which is the item currently selected in that gallery. And then when we go to our linking icon, those are the two values that are available to store that record in the gallery. I believe that covers everything. As I say, if I realize that I have actually covered that twice, I'll delete one of them, or I'll edit one of those out and only make you sit through it once. But I wanted to make sure you saw it at least once. So that's all of the work that needs to be done to add new records to our junction table. One last control on this screen, and that simply removes from the publication creator table whatever we have selected in this publication creator gallery. Whatever is selected in this gallery is removed with the remove command. There is no warning, it just happens. In a further development, I will probably figure out a way to display a message asking the user to confirm that. I haven't got that far. I've been so far devoting all my time to these other problems, the most important of which is getting these variables to work correctly with the defaults coming from different paths. And in order to make this a manageable task, I decided to split this video up into two sections. I'm going to quit here, having walked through the process of identifying which records are going to be linked together and then linking them together into the junction table or publications creator table. In the follow-up video, I will go back and look in more detail at the defaults and the way we have to manage all of that to get a visible set of cues to the user where they stand in relationship to the existing records and the new records they're going to add. All of that is sort of a verbose way of saying next time I'll show you the fun part. If you like what you've seen, if you're learning something valuable or useful or even interesting from these videos, please hit the like button, provide feedback in the comments, and subscribe to my channel. I will see you next time. Thank you.